Good afternoon and welcome to Know Your Worth, a virtual presentation on dating violence. I am your pseudo-host, Michelle Fisher. I'm an attorney with AppalReD Legal Aid, and joining us are some folks from Bethany House. Normally, this is the sort of outreach presentation that we would be doing with you in person. However, times have changed, as we well know, as a result of COVID. But that being said, needs in the community much remain the same, including the very important need to get out information to you all, our youth, about dating violence and the many forms that it can take. So to start off, I'm going to talk with the folks at Bethany House and hopefully give you all some information that they normally share in their in-person presentation. So to start with, I have the wonderful pleasure of working with these ladies on a near daily basis, whether I'm seeing them in court, talking with them over the phone, sending them an email, or getting resources from them. I get to work with them closely. However, you all, our audience, do not. So that being said, ladies, can you all introduce yourselves, please? Who are you?
All right. My name is Lisa Pittman, and I'm a court advocate at Bethany House, and I've been here for over 15 years.
I'm Savannah Jasper. I'm also a court advocate at the Bethany House, and I have right at 3 years.
I'm Robin Bradshaw. I'm a court advocate and counselor at the Bethany House. I've done many things while I've been there. I started out as a student about 8 years ago, did an AmeriCorps term, and then got hired on as Bethany House staff.
When you all say court advocate, what does a court advocate do?
Some of the things that we do.
More specifically, is that like an attorney, or how is your job different from my job?
Correct. We do not give any kind of legal advice. Our job mainly is to go into the courts as court advocates with people who are filing protective orders, and we help them, either, just let them know how the court process goes, what that's going to look like if they're kind of nervous, how the day will go. We can help them fill them out, show them in the right direction, and just provide resources and emotional support to the victims.
So part of what you all do is help connect the victims with some resources in the community that you think can benefit them,
Correct,
in addition to keeping them safe.
Correct.
Now, Bethany House at large, does it also assist survivors or victims who are not going to court?
That's correct. We have a 24/7 shelter. We provide, emergency shelter and safety is our main goal. So we have them come in, we provide them with shelter, get a safety plan going, evaluate their safety before we really do anything else. We have case management, we have counseling, we have support groups. I think Lisa P will probably tell you a little bit more about them. And we have community outreach. We go and speak to the community as far as education on domestic violence.
Lisa, can you tell us about that support group, please?
We have a support group, and it is called Survivors of Domestic Abuse, which we have coined it as SODA groups. They are 10 classes that you take. We hold them in Pulaski County at St. Luke's Clinic, 6 o'clock on Mondays, and in Taylor County right now at 12 o'clock at the Taylor County Extension Office. And
now,
it's for outreach. It's for people who are not in the shelter.
Now, do those folks include adults, or do they include teenagers or youth as well?
They're adults. That's our main thing right now. I'm sure that if they're older, we would probably could make an exception. But right now we're geared toward more adults.
Okay. So just to make sure everyone heard that, right now those services are geared more towards adults. We're kind of working with technology and learning as we go. So speaking of learning as we go and covering these things, what areas do you all cover?
We cover the Lake Cumberland Ad District. which we serve 10 counties. Those counties include Adair, Casey, Clinton, Cumberland County, Greene, McQuarrie, Pulaski, of course, Taylor, Russell, and Wayne counties.
All right, excellent. And with regards to your work and working with teenagers, do you all work with teenagers, and if so, in what capacity?
We have teenagers that are there at the shelter. We do some community education, as Robin stated before, and outreach, and health fairs and stuff like that. But I know that I've wore many hats at the shelter before, and I did work with did the children's advocacy for quite a while, and worked with them specifically. But I think all of us at one time or another works in the shelter and outside the shelter, especially in courts. We're seeing a lot more, that are teenagers that are in court these days.
So have you all assisted teenagers with the protective order process?
Yes, we have. We have stood with them in court, and it kind of looks like, when you go in there, you've got them, you get to stand with them in court for support, but it also provides support before, during, and after. Just because we're there for court don't mean that we're not going to help them anytime. It's ongoing. We're a support system, ongoing.
So there's never a point in time where you say, we're done. There's nothing else that we can do.
Never.
So we've talked a little bit about what your work with teenagers has looked like. Let's talk a bit more about dating violence, the topic of today, because the issue is approximately 1 in 3 will experience teen dating violence in their lifetime. So we're talking, if you ladies were in school, that one of you would be a victim, and what does that mean? What is dating violence?
It is when you're in a dating partnership and one partner exerts a destructive behavior over another to gain power or control over that person. Right? Yeah.
What information can you share about what those destructive behaviors might look like? What does that power and control dynamic look like from your experience?
Okay, we have attached the power and control wheel for teen dating violence. If anyone is interested in that, it just breaks down each area. Some of those include peer pressure, which is threatening to expose someone's weakness, maybe emotional abuse, anger, where they're putting the individual down, making him or her feel bad about themselves. Something that I feel like the individuals could really relate to is the use of the social media statuses. Whenever they are making threats to post possible pictures or belittling the individual on social media. Of course, we see those a lot in court. The intimidation, which is making someone afraid by using looks, gestures. They may even possibly smash things to intimidate them. Just different tactics to gain that power and control over the individual, so then they can do what they want that individual to do.
So when we talk about power and control, it's not just stuff that's physical.
Absolutely not. Some of the things I listed are some of the non-violent, the non-physical.
Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes when we're thinking about non-physical, those things can be threats of something physical, but we know it doesn't necessarily have to be. Like, for example, have you seen someone use guilt as a means to get that power of and control, that threatening to self-harm as just one example?
Absolutely.
A
We
lot of
see that a
times, yeah.
lot in court.
And have you seen anything like promises of material things, maybe for teenagers? Maybe there's something they really want and they can't afford it, but maybe their older significant other can, because they've got a job and they can drive and they can bring all these, so-called benefits. Have you seen that as an issue?
So a lot of times we call that love bombing, bringing them stuff and doing things for them, and it's like they look like they really really care, and they're wanting to give you all this stuff, but there's always the other end to it. We've been physically abused or verbally abused or emotionally abused, and then all of a sudden they're trying to get back in your good graces. So now they're buying you stuff and taking you places and doing things, or
A lot of times we refer that to the honeymoon stage. They may have posted those statuses on Facebook, exposed those pictures or text to friends or family, and then as a way, so it's not that or abuser's fault in the abuser's mind, then they'll do the honeymoon stage, like I said, that we refer to it as showering them with gifts. I love you. Well, if you hadn't have said this or did that, then I wouldn't have had to have reacted that way. That's absolutely not the truth.
Yeah. And then there's a term that we use with adult victims as well, gaslighting. And our teenagers today, they know so much. They've got Google right at their fingertips. But let's just go over what is gaslighting and how does it impact abuse?
Gaslighting kind of makes you feel crazy. Something happens, and when it's told again, it's like it didn't happen that way. That's not what happened. That's not what I said. And they use that as a tactic to control someone, to make them feel crazy.
Now, I want to talk about technology a bit more, because you mentioned pictures. And we know that folks are using technology like Snapchat, and they may think that a conversation or a photo disappears, and they may feel some kind of measure of safety in using that feature. Even Facebook now, you can, pull down for, disappearing messages, essentially. What has been your experience with that in regards to pictures and teenage dating violence?
Well, once you take a picture and it's out there, it's out there. You think that, you're taking this intimate picture and you're sending it to your boyfriend or girlfriend, and then that's as far as it's ever going to go. 6 months from now, that picture may reappear. Or he may, or she may use that picture as leverage over you to have you doing other things, we talked about sexual abuse. Sometimes they use these to gain power so that they can, have sex with somebody because, you've gone this far, and they're going to use this picture to ensure that that's what they get. They don't go away, and it can be used, and it can be used in court as well. If you're going to a court and you're in a domestic violence court, and you're standing up there, and you're trying to tell them about being sexually abused, and all of a sudden this picture appears that you posted or gave him 6 months ago, and all of a sudden it shows up. Now it looks like, he's using it against you in the courts.
And something I feel like a lot of times the teenagers may not think about those pictures at the time. However, say after they graduate from college and go start the career, a lot of times those pictures can resurface, and then of course that can affect whether or not a place of employment may hire you.
Yeah, so definitely something to be aware of. So we talked about sexual abuse a little bit, and we're going to delve more into that hopefully in April with the Donta Sexual Assault Resource Center. It's currently in the works. But I do want to touch on it here today because I realize some of our audience may or may not be the same, in April. So when we say sexual abuse, what is that? What are we referring to?
We automatically think that's pressuring you to have sex, but it's not just all about sex or having intercourse. It's also about pressuring you to take part in sexual acts, or sometimes it's
unwanted pregnancies.
Yeah, unwanted pregnancies. Some will take away their contraception.
Yes.
Not use contraception. Unwanted touches, unwanted kissing. Forcing you to
Basically,
watch porn.
Anything if you don't consent to, if you say no, no means no, those kinds of things.
Right. You have the right to say no. That is your own body. You have the right to say no at any time and stop whatever you're doing.
A very good resource for that, Michelle, as far as websites, is loveisrespect.org. That has a lot of different videos and examples of not only sexual abuse, but dating violence in general.
Yes. And I just want to point out for those of you who maybe they're just joining us or they haven't got a good look at what's on AppalReD's Facebook page right now, but we've also got a posting up with a relationship quiz. So if you're curious where your relationship's falling, check it out. I loved quizzes when I was younger, and in all honesty, I still do. So it can't hurt, and it might teach you something. So with regards to consent, we've talked about no means no. What does consent look like, and how can someone show that they have consented, or what are cues for those who are looking for that consent to go, okay, this is it, this is what we need?
It needs to be an open line of communication between them, the partners, and whatever they agree to as being consensual. Like you said, no means no. If they don't agree on something, anytime, that's broken, that is breaking consent.
Absolutely. We've got a question I want to address real quick from our audience. So what happens, or do you all help with people being sexually harassed on a school bus? So with regards to that, if that's all right with you all, I'll go ahead and answer that. If someone is being sexually harassed and they're on a school bus, that's still covered in what the school is supposed to help you with, and we are happy to help walk you through that process as well. Every federally funded educational institution is required to have what's called a Title IX coordinator to help deal with situations like this. Your guidance counselor could be another source, just whoever you're comfortable dealing with, but we will absolutely help with folks who are experiencing something like that. School should never be a place where someone is afraid or uncomfortable. School is preparing you all for the future, and we want the best future for all of you. And that absolutely cannot happen if you're scared to even get on the very bus that takes you to school, or if you're scared to get on the bus that takes you home from school. So absolutely.
Well, we also say, it's a safety planning rule. We would always say, tell someone, tell an adult. If you go to one adult and nothing gets done, you keep going. you tell somebody until you listen. And of course, you said, you know, the Title IX, a coordinator there is also can be used in this.
Yeah, absolutely. With regards to victims and the victims that we've served over the years, some of them together, some of them separately, would you say that there's kind of a common thread among victims that you've seen?
I think, like I said before, I don't feel like dating violence has any necessarily pinpoints exactly. It affects all areas as far as financial incomes, races, genders, all of that can be affected by the teen dating violence. A lot of times these abusers will find that vulnerability in the individual, whether it be a death, low self-esteem, any of those, just to name a few. Of course, if that person seeks to control you, of course, they're going to know what hurt you as well to gain that power and control.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you know, we know, because living in Appalachia, children have ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. And here in Appalachia, in this area, we tend to see several of those issues with substance abuse, issues with, you know, they don't have enough food to eat at home. They've got someone who's been incarcerated in their family. Very, very common. And on that note, we've got another question from our audience. Is teen dating violence really that common?
Absolutely, I think it is. And I think a lot of times where you set the bar of what you will tolerate makes you more susceptible to being in those situations. For instance, if you see your friends, maybe your parent, caregiver, being screamed at, abused, financially controlled, whatever the case may be, then you look at that because you trust that individual or you respect that individual, then you look at it as, well, that must be okay because whoever allows that person to treat them that way.
Yeah. Just as a quick reminder, again, it's 1 in 3 teens who are experiencing dating violence. And, you know, that could be a low ball estimate because I've read different studies that say as many as, you know, 50%. So I'd rather, you know, be safe than sorry. We know in this area, domestic violence, it's approximately 1 in 3, I believe. We often say 1 in 4, but I hear many times from Christy Childers, you know, the director at Bethany House, it's really more like 1 in 3. So,
and I think also, Michelle, with social media and so many different types of social media, I think that kind of has allowed teen dating violence or domestic violence in general to just run rampant. That's why we try to bring awareness to the individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of awareness, we've got another question. How should teens deal with online stalking, especially if they aren't sure who the person is? So I'm happy to give you all a chance, and I'm happy to pitch in what's been my experience as well. If you want me to go first, I'm happy to. All right, so I'm gonna take the lead on this one real quick. So dealing with online stalking. So to clarify, when we're talking about stalking, we're talking about not just one instance, although one instance can be horrible, you know, can absolutely be horrible. And we know that judges have issued protective orders based on one really horrific instance of, I believe it was domestic violence in the court case. So I just want to clarify that. But stalking is 2 or more instances. It's a pattern that reasonably places someone in fear. Okay, so they feel like they're going to be harmed. Now, that being said, what places someone reasonably in fear, it's going to look different from person to person, from my experience. Because if you've got someone who's repeated a phrase around you and it's always followed by a threat or a violent act, and then they post online one word, let me try to think of a word that they might post. Bullet, just bullet. And that's all that they post. But you know that they have told you, they have cut you down, they have told you your life is worth less than that. Okay. So that word bullet might be enough, to put you in fear. So I want to get that out there for everyone. In terms of what you can do, you can seek a protective order for that. You don't have to, but that's one option. Okay. Stalking is covered under interpersonal protective orders. There is no relationship required for it. That being said, I can see where it can make it particularly difficult if you're not sure who the person is. Okay. Now, also that being said, I've had instances where I've had a client who had some intimate pictures of her posted online, and she called me and told me about it. And immediately I was able to connect her with the state police post. We were able to identify the IP address of the person who posted those pictures and find out who they are. So this is something our area is taking very, very seriously, in my opinion. So that's definitely some situation where you're going to likely want one of us there, one of the attorneys from AppalReD there, and have a court advocate there as well, to help support you through that process, because it might not be directly physical, but it doesn't mean it's not trauma. Okay. And it doesn't mean that you don't need the same level of support as someone else who you might think has it worse. So trauma isn't about comparing, who has it the worst. Someone with a broken finger versus someone with a broken, leg, you're still both in pain. And if your finger's broken, you're not going to be able to do much if it's your thumb. So I just want to point that out. Okay. But those are some options if you don't know who the person is. Okay. So we can absolutely help you speak with law enforcement. We can absolutely help you seek a protective order. So those are a couple of options. And I can tell you something else too. The folks at Bethany House are some of the best Facebook investigators I have ever seen. I'll just be real honest with you. Their advocacy is tremendous. And the skills that I have learned in finding out who some of these abusers are, it's definitely come from them. So I want to say that, okay? They advocate for you like you are their own. So they offer a wonderful service.
We are your cheerleader.
Absolutely. Couldn't ask for better. Now, with regards to that, how can someone reach you all or reach anyone at Bethany House?
There's several ways. They can always call the hotline number. I think it's listed above on the screen there. 1-800-755-2017. That's open 24 hours a day. There's an advocate there to answer the phone. And even if they just want to talk through a situation and they're not necessarily looking for shelter, they can always call. We can be reached on Facebook Messenger. We don't like to talk a whole lot about situations on Facebook due to, being able to be monitored and those kinds of things. We don't actually know who we're talking to on the other end of the phone, if it was an abuser or somebody just fishing for more information. So we would probably refer them back to the crisis line. But those are a couple ways we can be reached. We also have an email, I think. If you had uploaded our brochure, that can be emailed, or our business line during the business hours.
Do you all have a safety plan or recommendation for teenagers who are dealing with dating violence?
And I just wanted to mention one thing about contacting us. Anytime someone contacts us, it's completely confidential. You don't have to worry about us telling anything, even if it's a teenager. We're not going to, tell their mom or anything like that. It's all confidential.
Absolutely. Definitely important to know. And then at shelter itself, you all have a procedure set up there in the event that a teenager, something that happens, they need to come into shelter in order to be protected. You all have a system there to protect them from abusers once they're at Bethany House. Is that right?
to actually come into shelter or be, I guess, emancipated.
Mm-hmm.
But we have other ways we can always talk to them and help them through whatever.
You're cutting out a little bit, so I think I'm missing your answer.
Well, at Bethany House, you have to be an adult. You have to be 18 years old, or as she said, emancipated in some form. But we would sit down with you and do an individualized safety plan with you to make sure you're safe. Make sure you find somewhere that you feel safe at. I think we do that, right? Anything else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think you've mentioned loveisrespect.org a little bit earlier, and I think that they've got a safety planning feature as well. And we can also upload, kind of this is an example of what a safety plan might look like, but everyone is going to be a little bit different. Okay. So if you could tell caregivers one thing about dating violence prevention, what would it be?
I would say go with your gut. If something doesn't feel right, if it does not make you comfortable, if you're just getting a bad feeling, talk to someone, whether it be your school, as far as counselors, teachers, someone you feel you can confide in. And like I said before, just because your friends may tolerate an individual cussing them, slapping, sexual assault, that does not mean it's okay. If you have any questions, like Robin had said, feel free to contact us at the Bethany House. We're open 24 hours a day.
That goes for the caregivers, I guess, too, if they had questions that they wanted to ask us about what's going on in their team's life, maybe they wanted to.
Absolutely. Now, with regards to that, I'm going to take you all out of the hot seat for a minute, because, we want to kind of shift gears and talk about what are some remedies with regards to dating violence. What are some services that we can offer? Before I do that, I do want to say why we decided to offer this presentation as a whole. We know that in many, many ways, teenagers, be them in middle school, be them in high school, often in this area, and really in this year in particular, have had to take on some really extraordinary responsibilities, some extraordinary circumstances, that they've been faced with. And that same thing goes for their educators and for their caregivers. It's a lot. It is a very large load, and we wanted to make sure that, you don't have to share it, and keep it to yourself. You can share it with us. We can carry this. We've done this, and that's what we're here for. That's what we were here for before the pandemic, and it's certainly what we're here for during, and it's absolutely what we're going to be here for after. So I also want to add the patterns, the relationships that you are in today. These are the building blocks for your all's future. Okay. And I'm talking specifically to the middle schoolers, to the high schoolers right now. Maybe you think this is middle school. It doesn't matter. It's high school. It doesn't matter. This is what an immature relationship looks like. That is what your future could look like. Okay. In terms of dating violence, there is a study. It looked at, to be very frank with you, teenage homicides between 2003 and 2016. And almost 7% of those homicides, it was about 150 teens, were killed by a current or a former intimate partner. So we don't want that to be you. We don't want that to be our community. And it doesn't have to be just the risk of homicide to take it seriously either. We know the effects of abuse are many, and they trickle down through the generations. So we want you to be the generation that says it stops with us. Okay. We know you've got so much potential. And what we want you to do, and what we want to help you do, is to protect and nourish that potential. So we need you to know that we are here, our ears are open, and our services are free. I know as a child growing up in Appalachia, if I had mentioned I need to talk to an attorney, or I need to talk to a counselor, I know that's something that we did not have money for. And I never want, and we never want, a financial barrier to be the thing that stops you from coming forward. There are a lot of other barriers. That doesn't need to be one of them. So I just want to be very upfront with that to start with. And for the teens who are watching, and maybe for the caregivers who are watching, maybe you think, this doesn't apply to me, but maybe it does, maybe it will, or maybe it applies to someone that you know. I know that we have asked, like I said, teenagers to take on a great responsibility this year, but I'm going to ask you to take on one more. And in this respect, it is an essential part of being an adult, of being a successful adult, to take on, to do something for your community. And this could be the thing, pointing someone the right way, getting them out of this situation. So with that being said, I'm going to hop off my soapbox for a second and talk to you about the remedies that I can help you with, okay? If you contact AppalReD Legal Aid. So before you contact me, if you're in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, where you feel threatened, where you feel at risk, where you feel exposed, what I'm going to suggest you do is reach out to an adult. Find your person. Hopefully you have an adult who is in that role for you, and that can be any adult. I've used the word caregiver here today because I recognize that many of you are in the care of your grandparents maybe, or an aunt or an uncle, or you've been placed with someone who chose you and who chooses you every day. So I just want to make sure you know that these folks are there for you, because that's one of the tactics of abuse, is to make you feel isolated and to make you feel alone. So that person for you might be a teacher. I'll be real honest, for me, school was a haven. That was a place where I knew I was untouchable, I was on top of the world, and I was safe, okay? I was so safe, I think, that sometimes I would fall asleep in class just content, just happy, in between getting the best instruction of my life, by the way. Shout out to all my teachers. So, might not be your teacher, it might be a guidance counselor. Okay, maybe you've got a great relationship with your guidance counselor. I encourage you all to forge that relationship. If you don't, they can be very handy in guiding you to a trade school, to college, and also to a place of safety. Okay, they've got lots of training for this. Title IX coordinator. We mentioned earlier a little bit about what a Title IX coordinator does. They're someone who's supposed to handle these sorts of things, to handle issues of violence and discrimination. And that's part of what Title IX is for. It's not just for sports, okay? It's to help handle situations where there's violence against students, okay? We need to make sure it's addressed. You can talk to a parent, all right? It could be a parent, it could be a guardian, it could be an aunt and uncle, it could be your priest. And then, of course, you could talk to us. And whether you talk to us last on that list or whether you talk to us first, we can help you just the same. If you don't feel comfortable disclosing to a parent, Bethany House has mentioned that they can talk to you without telling your parents. They can talk to you without picking up the phone and calling another adult and saying, hey, this is what's going on. We're not going to do that to you, because we recognize home isn't always a safe place for people. Or even if it's safe, but maybe you don't feel that it's safe. You want some time to process what's happened to you, okay? AppalReD Legal Aid is the same. If you contact me and you need help, there is a variety of help really that I can help you with. I can help you with court. We can do a temporary interpersonal protective order, and that is a temporary order, and it's good for up to 6 months, and it usually has some terms in it, like you are to stay 500 feet away from this person, to not come within 500 feet of this location. And that may be your school, it may be where you work, it may be your home, okay? And when you apply for that temporary interpersonal protective order, that could be your name on that application, or it could be, I'm going to say any adult's name, because I have had a situation where it wasn't a parent and it wasn't an aunt or anybody like that. It was just another caring adult who stepped up and said, this child needs help. Okay. So for caregivers out there, you might not have an official title. That doesn't mean you don't have a role, and it doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility. Once you go through the process of the person being served, there's a hearing on that temporary interpersonal protective order. And you can get that based on acts of dating violence. You can get it based on acts of sexual assault. You can get it based on acts of stalking. Okay. Once that person's served and you have a hearing, that means that the judge is going to then enter an interpersonal protective order or say there's insufficient evidence. Now, the burden of proof is preponderance of the evidence, and that means more likely than not. I'll be real honest with you, there are some folks who take that to mean 51%, and that is the cutoff. Now, my teacher in law school always taught me preponderance of the evidence. It's a little tricky because how do you figure out when you're 51%? How do you really, are you somewhere between 50 and 70? And if you're just over that line, are you really going to know for sure? So it can be a little bit tricky. I do want to clarify because we've got a question asking, so to clarify, can a caregiver get a protective order on behalf of the teen? Yes, they can. They can file. Now, the issue that may arise, because I do want to speak about this a little bit, I feel like in most people's minds who work with teenagers, and we get on the topic of sexual abuse, sexual assault, and people think of Romeo and Juliet situations. So a caregiver, if you're in a situation and your teen is in an unhealthy relationship, you can seek a protective order for them. The issue that might arise is if the teenager is unwilling to cooperate, if they're not willing to testify, because you can't say what they said because that's hearsay. So presenting evidence can become an issue. Okay. Now, if there's different types of evidence, you don't necessarily have to have that. But the judge is almost definitely going to be really looking for some testimonial evidence, unless it's really extraordinary circumstances. Okay. Like for instance, unfortunately, we know that this happens sometimes in the area. If you've got a 13-year-old who is speaking with someone online and thought they were, 16. Now for me as a caregiver, that's still, we're not liking that. And we're telling our teen, absolutely do not do that. But there's someone who can drive, someone with access to a car, and they convince the teen to meet up with them. And then they find out they're not 16. Maybe they're 18. Maybe they're 25. And maybe they decide to take off with your 13-year-old and go to another city or another state. Okay. I think that's an extraordinary circumstance from my perspective. And if you give the right evidence, the right testimony about what you've seen, what you've observed, what worries you, I think you could get a judge to enter something like that, even if your teenager isn't cooperating. So yes, you can. Now, that being said, attorneys have to be very clear when they take on a case. This person is my client. So in a case like that, you almost have to make a very big distinction, and everybody involved needs to know. Either this caregiver is my client who's seeking this protective order, or this teenager is my client. Because it seems like a situation, it definitely can't be both. Okay, so we just have to be very clear on that. In cases even where I have parents and teenagers who are on the same page, and caregivers in general who are all on the same page, yes, this person needs protection. I always, as part of the conversation, say, this teenager that I'm working with, this adolescent, they're going to give me more information if I can assure them that what I say is not going to be shared with you. And ultimately, that's going to help me do my job better. And ultimately, that's going to help me get them the protection that they need. And the parents and the caregivers that I've worked with are on board with that for the most part. And I know it can be, a hard pill to swallow and to deal with, but I can't help them if they won't let me. And that's really what it boils down to. So I hope that answered their question. Now, with regards to teens and resistance against getting a protective order about someone, there are a lot of misconceptions about protective orders. And I just want to back up for a second. A TIPO, I mentioned 6 months. An interpersonal protective order that you can get after a hearing, that can be for up to 3 years and can be extended as long as you file before it's expired. Okay. And if you get one underneath a caregiver's name when you're 15, if you're 18 and it expires, it has to be refiled under your name. So just a quick point of clarification. I do want to talk about misconceptions to protective orders because I feel like that's a big barrier. I feel though adolescents and teenagers, maybe they're told that protective orders are going to ruin this other person's life. Okay. Maybe caregivers are told if your child gets a protective order against my child or against this child I'm representing, then this is going to ruin their life. So I want to share something with you on that. With regards to ruining their life, so people will talk about background checks. A background check generally, and there are different levels of checks, but the most common is a criminal background check. An interpersonal protective order is a civil order. It is not going to show up on 98% of background checks, and that's a real official estimate, I promise. It's not. But that being said, for the most part, these are not going to show up and are not going to impact this other person other than they're going to keep them away from you. And they're going to make sure that they don't possess a weapon. When I was talking about those homicides and those figures of 7% being killed between 2003 and 2016, 150 teenagers, those were with weapons. Those are with guns. And we know that there's a percentage of folks who perpetuate dating violence who end up, unfortunately, shooting up a school, because that can be part of dating violence as well. So ultimately, we need to get the firearms out of their hands. Now, they won't lose the right to have a gun forever. They will not. It would only be for the term of the protective order. So it might be 1 year, it might be 2 years, it might be 3 years. Okay. There are some jobs that if you've got a protective order on your background, you're going to have a problem getting a job. That may be true. But in my opinion, also what is a problem is if you've got someone who is making you terrified to come to school, is making you afraid to sleep at night because you're not sure what you're going to see when you go to bed, what nightmares you might have. Your life matters too. Okay, so I really want to talk about that. And if you have a civil restraining order, some opposing counsels will suggest, let's do a civil restraining order. Let me tell you a secret about a civil restraining order. If it's entered in a protective order case and the protective order is dismissed, if I represented respondents in protective orders, which I do not, but the first thing that I would argue is, well, that order is dismissed as soon as that action is dismissed. Now, there are some judges who will say that's not the case, but you're flipping a coin from my perspective, and your future is not something to flip a coin with. If you want to get a protective order and get it for 6 months and see how things go and then dismiss it if things go great, that's your option and that's your prerogative. Okay. If you've got someone who maybe you don't want a protective order, maybe you don't want your caregivers to know what's going on. Maybe you've got a case where someone has taken your photos, or that they've hacked your account, you've sent them a picture, or something else has happened, and you don't want anyone to know. You're mortified. What can you do? Call us, okay? There is an online removal guide I'm happy to walk you through. cybercivilrights.org has it posted. And I'm also happy to make a phone call either to that other person who's posting those images or to their parents, depending on your level of comfort. Because KRS 531-120 specifically addresses the distribution of sexually explicit images without consent. And sometimes a phone call can be the quickest way to get those images off of the internet. I know I had to make one of those phone calls yesterday. So don't think court is your only option. And if it's your only option, you don't want to do it because you're going to be too embarrassed. You're too worried about embarrassing your caregiver or your parents. You don't have to do that if that's not the way you want to go. So there are options. The sorts of behavior that can get you a protective order are stalking, which we've talked about, breaking things, threats to you, threats to themselves, threats to harm themselves. Because if that is constantly putting you in a state of fear, that can be argued as part of dating violence. Physical things like strangulation. I think we've mentioned that, but what I do want to mention is the pressure required for strangulation to hurt someone. It is the force of a firm handshake. That's all it is. And I know that a lot of you are at an age where adults are telling you, you've got to have a good handshake. Well, think about that next time you get a handshake, okay? And the next time someone puts their hand on you, all right? We don't want that happening to you. I do want to repeat, can we repeat the website for the cyber removal guide? So that's cybercivilrights.org, okay? Now that was something that came out a couple of years ago when it felt like it was impossible to get something offline. I think that we've made some progress since then. Not perfect, but I think that we've made a little bit of progress. I can tell you personally, I was reporting some offensive things yesterday and they were not immediately removed. So it's a process we are absolutely willing to go through with you. You've got me and you've got your cheerleaders. And again, could not ask for better. With regards to evidence, screenshots, pictures, pictures of bruises, pictures of anything that they have done to you, anything that they've broken. When I say pictures and barriers, I want to make sure I note, I've had clients before who were nervous about coming forward for a protective order because they were worried you couldn't see the bruise on them because of the color of their skin. Okay, so 2 things I want to say to that. Yes, you can. We just had to darken it. Okay, it's nothing that's beyond our reach. We've got wonderful tech people who are here to support us and make sure we can do our job to the best of our ability. Number 2, testimonial evidence is enough. If you don't have pictures, if you don't have screenshots, if you don't have text, your word is enough. Okay. You can also record calls. Kentucky is just a one-party consent recording state. So if you're getting a phone call and it makes you feel uncomfortable, pop that record button. You are not going to get in trouble for that. Okay. And it's a great piece of evidence when you're in court, especially when we're trying to talk about what has made you feel afraid. All right. And of course, having witnesses handy, having pictures, being prepared as to what the court process itself looks like. And we've got a great other presentation that was done by some of my colleagues a couple of months ago about remote court and all you need to know about protective orders. I encourage you all to check that out when you get a moment. I work with really wonderful people, and it's been a blessing to be here. So with all that being said, again, I just want to repeat to you, we are here. Our ears are open and our services are free. If you all have any other questions, we are happy to answer them. So please let us know. And if any of the ladies at Bethany House want to ask me some questions and put me in the hot seat, I'm happy to sit here too for a minute.
I don't think I have any questions. I believe you've covered everything really well, Michelle. We appreciate you letting us join you today.
Mm-hmm.
I am very glad that we could do this. I am very grateful to our IT folks behind the scenes. I can never sing the praises enough of all the folks who work in the background of a legal office, be it our secretaries, be it our tech folks. Paul and Sarah, they do a wonderful job, and the content you see on here, I give them all the credit for. And thank you all for showing up, and thank you to Christy Childers to loaning you 3 to me this afternoon. It has been wonderful. So if we don't have any other questions, I think that's a wrap. I do want to state here for those who may be watching after the fact, we will periodically take a look at this and answer your questions that we see popping up, because we know you may not have been able to watch this live, and we still want you to know we are here. So with that being said, thank you all for your time. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Sarah. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Legal aid provides assistance to people who don't have the money to hire an attorney to help them present their case. When we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, we end with, "and justice for all." And that's what legal aid does. Legal aid helps make that promise a reality in the United States so that justice is for all and not just for the few who can afford it.
There's no way in the world I could have afforded to get legal representation if I had to pay. And so, you know, when you get the type of representation that I got, and it's a nonprofit organization, I don't really know if there's any words that can describe how much that means to a woman coming out of an abusive relationship with 2 children. You know, can you really put a price on your and your children's safety? And so I'm just really grateful.
She had filed this domestic violence petition alleging that her now ex-husband had followed her state to state. And so she had moved to Kentucky for a support system, and he showed up randomly. And that's when she became terrified because of the history of domestic violence.
I've had to go to court many times by myself, and the anxiety and the paranoia and just the physical illness that you feel, terrified that you step. No one should ever have to go into a courtroom without representation. No one. We don't know all the legal mumbo jumbo. There's times when I was in court with her where we get out of court and I was like, what? And she's had to explain to me, you know, what was said, because when you get into all that legal talk, for someone like me, you're speaking alien.
I feel like it makes the community better because we're able to go to court and hold people accountable and ensure that the justice system is a little more fair.
I mean, I remember after I sat down with her for the first time and just did a consult, I cried for about an hour in my car down the road. Because it was, I don't want to get emotional. It was the first time somebody cared. It was the first time I had like a beacon of hope.
You are entitled to an attorney in criminal cases. Unfortunately, that does not spread to civil cases. So it can be very scary for someone to encounter one of these lawsuits and know that they have no right to counsel.
My husband ended up having emergency heart surgery, and they was not sure if he would survive or not. So I ended up halfway through my mortgage, and then the mortgage company decided that I would not re-qualify for the balance of my mortgage. So I started making phone calls to get help to not lose my home. This was my inheritance, was this piece of property. I feel like it's my heritage, and they were going to take it away from me. It doesn't give them a right, because they have more money than me, to come after me. And people don't have a recourse. People feel that I did not feel that I had a recourse at the time. I could not afford to pay thousands of dollars out an attorney. I'm trying to save my house. If I can't pay the house, I can't pay a big high-dollar attorney bill. So then we started a bankruptcy proceeding, which stopped them from coming. In the meantime, while I was in this proceeding, though, the mortgage company sent a person out here to my home while my husband still had stitches in his chest to put a lock on the house. And I did not even have a court order. And I said, get off my property. When my grown children stepped up and helped, and if we hadn't had them, I couldn't have made it by myself. Between them and AppalReD, the good Lord above, that's what saved us.
My 21st birthday, I landed on Eglin Air Force Base. So I served 4 years active duty there on Eglin. I traveled all over the United States, and I got to do one tour in Saudi, 129 days. I don't particularly care for that one, but it gave me experience. In 1999, I had my son, and I decided to not renew my contract with the Air Force. And so in December of 1999, I got out, came back home. I had to have a surgery, and so I had to take some time off work and couldn't do a whole lot there for a while, so I got behind on financial matters, the Jeep being one. Actually, it was 14 days past the due date, and he took my vehicle. I called the police, first of all, and then as they were talking to me, and they said, well, is it financed? And I said, well, yeah, but I mean, it's not 30 days late. He agreed to take my payment, and nowhere in my imagination did I think that he had took my car. So they checked into it, and sure enough, it had been repossessed illegally.
When I talked to the man who owned the car dealership, I didn't say anything to him really other than this is the law.
She was something, let me tell you. She didn't let him mow her or plow over her like he did me.
So I'm always happy to sometimes explain the law to a car dealer if I need to, and that day I think he heard me loud and clear, so we were glad.
The day we signed the contract and I drove off in my Jeep, it was like, I know it's not the most beautiful vehicle, but to me it is, because it was a battle getting it back. I only have 2 more payments. I will have the title free and clear on my Jeep, which is wonderful to me.
The need for our services in our community is overwhelming, and unfortunately, based on the resources that we have, it's not uncommon that we have to turn people away for services.
People go into court, face the loss of their home, maybe the loss of income, the loss of custody of a child, maybe the loss of health coverage, any variety of very important and life-changing interests that are at stake. And anybody with money would never face those kinds of issues without an attorney. One of the things that drew me to legal aid was the opportunity to work for the powerless, for the forgotten, for those who have no one else to stand with them. And we at Legal Aid, we are there to stand with those people who have no one else. And I continue after 20 years of doing this to be so proud to be a part of this legal aid community that does so much every day for people when they face these kinds of problems without lawyers.